The door was not locked, so Elena Marsh walked straight into the apartment she had been paying rent on for the past 2 years, carrying a box of pastries for the man she was supposed to marry in 6 days. She stopped in the hallway when she heard her sister laugh, the kind of laugh that only came out when Grace thought no one else could hear her. Elena's fingers went cold around the box. She followed the sound to the bedroom door, already half open, and stood there long enough to understand everything, without needing a single word explained to her. Daniel Pierce was sitting on the edge of the bed with Grace's hand resting on his shoulder, and the moment his eyes met Elena's over Grace's head, he did not even have the decency to look surprised. He looked annoyed, as if she had interrupted something ordinary, something that had already been happening for a long time before this morning. "Elena," he said, standing up too quickly, "this isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Grace said quietly, and that was somehow worse than if she had tried to lie. Elena did not scream. She did not throw the box of pastries, though some small, furious part of her wanted to. She simply turned around and walked out of the apartment, down 3 flights of stairs, and into the cold morning air, where she stood on the sidewalk and realized she had nowhere to go, because every place she thought of as home was now connected to one of the 2 people who had just destroyed her life. She called her mother first, and her mother's silence on the phone told her that this was not new information to everyone. Her mother had known. Maybe not the details, but she had known something was wrong, and she had said nothing because Grace was the favorite, and Grace had always been the one who got what she wanted, even when what she wanted belonged to someone else. Elena did not go back to the apartment that night. She checked into a small motel on the edge of town with the money she had saved for a honeymoon that would never happen, and she lay on the stiff mattress staring at the ceiling, replaying every year of her relationship with Daniel, searching for the moment she should have noticed. There had been signs, she realized now, the late nights he explained away, the way Grace always seemed to know details about their relationship that Elena had never shared with her, the way Daniel's phone was always turned face down on the table. By morning, Elena had made a decision. She would not fight for an apology. She would not sit through a wedding cancellation and the pitying looks of relatives who had already suspected the truth. She packed 1 suitcase, withdrew what savings she had in her own name, and bought a one-way train ticket to a city 300 miles away, a city where nobody knew her name, her family, or the humiliation she was running from. The train ride gave her too much time to think. She watched the fields blur past the window and tried to imagine a version of her life that did not include either Daniel or Grace, and found that the image was strangely easy to picture. She had spent 5 years building her identity around being Daniel's fiancée, being Grace's quieter, more forgettable sister. Now there was nothing left to be except herself, whoever that turned out to be. When the train pulled into the city, Elena stepped onto the platform with her single suitcase and no plan beyond finding a room to sleep in that night. The city was loud, in a way her hometown never had been, full of people moving quickly past each other without a single glance, which suited her perfectly. She wanted to disappear into a crowd of strangers, at least for a while. She found a cheap room above a laundromat, paid a week in advance, and spent the next several days walking the streets, reading help wanted signs in windows, trying to piece together the shape of a new life. Most jobs required experience she did not have, or connections she had left behind. She was starting to wonder if coming here had been a foolish, impulsive mistake when she saw a sign in the window of an elegant restaurant near the center of the city, a place with dark wood and gold lettering on the glass, looking for a hostess. She almost did not go in. The restaurant looked far too expensive for someone who had just checked into a room above a laundromat, but she thought of Grace's hand on Daniel's shoulder, and something hardened in her chest, a refusal to shrink any further than she already had. She walked in, asked for the manager, and by some stroke of luck that felt like the first kind thing life had offered her in weeks, she was hired on the spot, mostly because the manager was desperate and she was, in his words, presentable and calm under pressure. Her first week at the restaurant passed in a blur of learning names, memorizing the seating chart, and smiling at customers whose problems seemed impossibly small compared to her own. She liked the rhythm of it, the way each night had a clear beginning and end, the way nobody asked her personal questions because nobody there knew she had any history worth asking about. It was on a Thursday evening, during the dinner rush, that everything shifted again. A private section of the restaurant had been reserved for a group of men in expensive suits, men who moved with a quiet authority that made even the restaurant's owner nervous when he greeted them. Elena had been told, in a hushed voice by one of the older waiters, to be polite, efficient, and to never ask questions about anything she might overhear in that section. She had not planned on serving that table herself, but when the assigned waiter suddenly fell ill halfway through the night, Elena was the only one available to step in. She approached the table with her notepad, keeping her eyes down out of habit more than fear, and it was only when she looked up to take the order that she saw him properly for the first time. He was seated at the head of the table, younger than she expected someone with that kind of presence to be, with dark eyes that studied her for a moment longer than any of the other men bothered to. There was something unreadable about his expression, not cold exactly, but guarded, the look of a man who had learned a long time ago not to reveal what he was thinking. "You're new," he said, and it was not really a question. "Started last week," Elena answered, keeping her voice steady. He studied her a moment longer, then simply nodded, and gave his order without further comment, and the rest of the table followed his lead. Elena moved through the evening as professionally as she could manage, though she found herself aware of his presence in a way she could not quite explain, the way a person becomes aware of a storm on the horizon long before it arrives. Later that night, as the last of the private section was leaving, one of the men lingered near the front and slipped an envelope into her hand. "Mr. Calloway wants you to have this," he said simply, before following the others out into the night. Elena opened the envelope once she was alone in the small employee room at the back of the restaurant. Inside was far more money than the evening's tips could have possibly amounted to, along with a plain card that had only a name and a phone number written on it. Victor Calloway. She stared at the card for a long moment, uncertain whether she had just been given a generous tip, or pulled, without any warning at all, into something far larger than she understood. She did not call the number that night. She told herself she would forget about it, that men like Victor Calloway existed in a world completely separate from hers, a world she had no business stepping into after everything she had already survived. But she kept the card, tucked into the lining of her suitcase, and she found herself thinking about those dark, unreadable eyes more often than she wanted to admit. 3 days later, the choice was taken out of her hands entirely, because trouble found her before she ever found the courage to make a call, and by the end of that week, Elena Marsh would understand that some doors, once opened even a crack, cannot ever be closed again. The trouble arrived on a rainy Tuesday night, just after closing, when Elena was walking the 4 blocks from the restaurant to her small room above the laundromat. She had noticed the same man twice that week, standing across the street from the restaurant, watching the entrance for longer than any customer waiting for a table would need to. She had told herself it was nothing, that she was simply nervous after everything that had happened back home, seeing danger in shadows that meant nothing at all. That night, the man stepped out from an alley just ahead of her, blocking the narrow sidewalk. He was not from the restaurant, and he was not dressed like anyone she had ever served. His jacket was worn, his eyes sharp with a kind of desperation that frightened her more than open aggression would have. "You're the girl who served Calloway's table," he said, and it was not a friendly observation. Elena's heart began to pound. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." He took a step closer. "You're going to do something for me. Small thing. Just tell me when he's coming back to that restaurant. What night? What time?" Elena backed away, her mind racing. "I'm just a hostess. I don't know anything about his schedule." "Then find out," the man said, his voice low and threatening, though he made no move to touch her, seeming to understand that a struggle in the open street would draw too much attention. "Or things get difficult for you. You're new here. Nobody would notice if something happened to you." Before Elena could respond, headlights swept across the wet street, and a car slowed beside them. The man in the alley froze, then turned and disappeared back into the darkness before the car had even fully stopped. The passenger door opened, and one of the men Elena recognized from the private dinner stepped out, scanning the street with quick, practiced eyes, before helping her into the car without asking a single question about what had just happened. She rode in silence, shaking, until the car pulled up outside a building she did not recognize, tall and modern, with a private entrance that required a key card even to reach the elevator. She was led upstairs, into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and there, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, was Victor Calloway. "You didn't call the number," he said, without turning around at first. "I didn't think I was supposed to need it," Elena answered, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out, despite how badly her hands were still shaking. Victor finally turned to face her, and for a moment he simply studied her, the way he had at the restaurant, that unreadable expression giving nothing away. "That man in the alley works for someone who wants information about my movements. He would have hurt you to get it, or worse, used you as a way to reach me. I had someone watching the restaurant because I suspected they might try something like this. I didn't expect them to move so quickly." "Why would anyone think I know anything about your business?" Elena asked. "Because you served my table, and in my world, that's enough to make you a target, whether it's fair or not." He gestured to a chair, and Elena sat, mostly because her legs no longer felt entirely reliable. "I run several legitimate businesses in this city. I also have interests that are far less legitimate, and I have enemies who would use anyone close to me as leverage. You are not close to me, not yet. But tonight you became visible to people who would very much like to hurt me through someone they think I care about." "So what happens now?" Elena asked. "I go back to my room and hope that man doesn't come back." Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, and yet somehow kept her from doing so. "I could offer you protection, a different job, one that keeps you inside places I control, away from the kind of exposure you had tonight. Or I could simply have someone see you safely out of this city entirely, back to wherever you came from, and forget any of this happened." "I'm not going back," Elena said quickly, more forcefully than she intended. Something flickered across his face, an expression she could not quite name. "Then you understand what I'm offering comes with conditions. You would need to trust me, at least enough to follow certain rules. Where you live, who you speak to, what you say about what you see." Elena thought of Daniel's face when she found him with Grace, of her mother's guilty silence on the phone, of the humiliation that had chased her 300 miles from home. She thought of the man in the alley and how close she had come to being hurt for information she did not even have. She was tired, she realized, of being someone things happened to. She wanted, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to be someone who made her own decisions, even dangerous ones. "What would I be doing?" she asked. "Managing the restaurant where you already work. My previous manager retired last month, and the new one is not working out. You have a steady head under pressure. I saw that tonight, and I saw it 3 nights ago at the table." Victor moved closer, though he kept a careful, respectful distance. "You would live in a building I own, with security. You would not need to worry about men like the one you met tonight." It should have felt like too much, too fast. A stranger offering her an entirely new life after knowing her for less than a week. But Elena had already lost the life she thought she was building, brick by brick, over 5 years, and it had taken Daniel and Grace less than a single morning to knock it all down. Perhaps a life built quickly could be just as strong, if she was careful about how she built it. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." Over the following weeks, Elena settled into her new role at the restaurant, now with a title and a salary that reflected genuine responsibility, rather than simple hospitality. She moved into a small but comfortable apartment in a building with a security desk in the lobby, and though she rarely saw Victor in person, she often felt the quiet, distant presence of his attention, the sense that she was being watched over rather than watched. Their conversations, when they happened, were brief and businesslike at first. He would stop by the restaurant to review numbers, or send a message asking how a particular evening had gone, always polite, always careful to maintain a professional distance. Elena found herself curious about him despite her best efforts not to be. Curious about the contrast between the careful, controlled man she saw and the reputation that seemed to surround him like a shadow whenever his name was mentioned by others. She learned, slowly and through pieces overheard rather than explained directly, that Victor's family had built their wealth through means that stretched far outside the boundaries of ordinary law, that his position placed him at odds with other powerful families who wanted what he had, and that the threat from the man in the alley had not been an isolated incident, but part of a larger, ongoing conflict that Victor navigated with careful precision every single day. One evening, nearly 2 months after she had taken the manager position, Victor arrived at the restaurant after closing, his expression more troubled than she had seen it before. He asked to speak with her privately, and once they were alone in her small office, he told her that the same family behind the man in the alley had grown bolder, that they had begun making inquiries about her specifically, about her connection to him, testing whether she could still be used as leverage even now. "I need you to move into my residence," he said, without any of his usual careful diplomacy. "It's the only way I can guarantee your safety at all times. I understand if that makes you uncomfortable." Elena felt a strange mixture of fear and something else entirely, something she did not want to examine too closely. "Is there another option?" "There is one," Victor said slowly, watching her carefully. "If we were married, the families I'm dealing with would understand that any move against you carries the same weight as a move against me directly. It changes the calculation for them. It is not a romantic proposal, Elena. It is a practical solution to a dangerous problem, and I would not ask it of you if I saw another way to keep you safe." The office was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigeration units in the kitchen beyond the wall. Elena thought of every reason this should have sounded absurd. A stranger offering marriage as a business arrangement after only 2 months of careful, distant acquaintance. And yet she thought, too, of how much safer she had felt in this city, under his quiet protection, than she had ever felt in her old life, surrounded by people who claimed to love her. "If I say yes," she said finally, "what happens to my life? My name, the things I want for myself?" "You keep them," Victor answered without hesitation. "This is not a cage, Elena. It is a shield. What you do with the life behind that shield is entirely your own choice." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the deception she had learned to recognize too late in Daniel's expression, and found none of it here, only a steady, careful honesty that she had not expected from a man in his position. "Then yes," she said quietly, "I'll marry you." Victor nodded once, and something in his shoulders eased slightly, though his expression remained composed. "We'll need to move quickly. I'll have the arrangements made within the week." As Elena walked home that night, her mind spinning with the weight of the decision she had just made, she found herself thinking not of fear, but of a strange, unfamiliar sense of possibility. She had come to this city with nothing but a single suitcase and a heart broken beyond recognition. Now she was about to become the wife of one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the city, and though she could not have explained it fully even to herself, she felt, for the first time since that terrible morning in Daniel's apartment, that she was finally moving towards something, instead of simply running away. The wedding was small and quiet, held in a private room of the same restaurant where Elena had first served Victor's table, attended only by a handful of people whose loyalty to Victor ran deep enough to be trusted with the truth of the arrangement. There were no flowers scattered down an aisle, no tearful mother watching from the front row, no version of the wedding Elena had once imagined for herself back when she believed Daniel was the man she would spend her life with. Instead, there was a quiet exchange of vows written more for legal necessity than romantic sentiment, a plain gold ring slipped onto her finger by a man she barely knew, and a strange, hollow sense of finality that settled over her once the short ceremony ended. Victor's residence turned out to be nothing like the imposing fortress Elena had pictured in her mind. It was a large, elegant house set back from the street behind a high wall and careful security, but inside, it felt more like a home that had simply never been properly lived in, all clean lines and quiet rooms that seemed to be waiting for someone to fill them with warmth. Elena was given her own wing, connected to the rest of the house but private enough that she could retreat entirely if she chose to, and for the first several weeks, that was exactly what she did. Victor kept his distance in those early days, perhaps out of respect for the strange circumstances of their arrangement, perhaps simply because his schedule left him little time for anything beyond his work. Elena continued managing the restaurant during the day, returning each evening to a house that felt more like an elegant hotel than a home, sharing quiet, polite dinners with her husband that rarely moved beyond discussions of the restaurant's numbers or the general state of the city outside their walls. She noticed things about him slowly, the way small observations accumulate over weeks, until they form a fuller picture of a person than any single conversation could provide. She noticed that he read for an hour every night before sleeping, always history or biography, never anything lighter. She noticed that he asked the household staff about their families by name, remembering details from months earlier that most employers would never bother to retain. She noticed that despite the quiet ruthlessness that seemed to follow his reputation through every conversation she overheard about him, he was unfailingly patient with her, never once pressuring her to be anything other than exactly what she was comfortable being. One evening, several weeks into their marriage, Elena found him in his study long after the household had gone quiet, staring at a set of documents spread across his desk, with an expression of genuine exhaustion that she had not seen from him before. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain whether to intrude, but something about the tired set of his shoulders made her step inside anyway. "Bad news?" she asked, nodding toward the papers. Victor looked up, seeming almost surprised that she had noticed enough to ask. "The family that sent the man after you in the alley. They run shipments through the docks on the east side of the city. I've spent the last 3 years trying to push them out of that territory without triggering a war that would put a lot of innocent people in danger. Tonight I learned they've found a way around every safeguard I put in place." "What happens if they succeed?" Elena asked, settling into the chair across from his desk without quite deciding to do so. "Then they gain enough power to challenge my position directly, and people who currently trust me to keep this city stable will find themselves caught in the middle of a conflict I've spent years trying to prevent." He rubbed a hand across his face, and for the first time, Elena saw not the composed, controlled man the city feared, but simply a person carrying a weight too heavy for anyone to carry alone. "Why do you do it?" she asked. "The stability, the careful balance. You could take the easier path, couldn't you? The one your reputation suggests you'd take without hesitation." Victor was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with more seriousness than Elena expected. "My father built this position through fear alone, and it cost him everything eventually, including the loyalty of the very people who should have protected him when he needed it most. I decided a long time ago that fear is a poor foundation for anything meant to last. People follow me because the alternative is worse for them, not simply because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." It was the most he had ever told her about himself, and Elena found herself wanting to know more, a curiosity that surprised her with its intensity. "Is that why you didn't just have that man in the alley disappear? Why you brought me here instead and offered me a choice?" "You noticed that," Victor said, something like approval in his voice. "I notice a lot of things," Elena answered. "It's been useful, in my line of work and otherwise." A faint, genuine smile crossed his face then, the first she had seen from him, brief but real. "Then you'll understand when I say that forcing you into anything, including this marriage, would have made me exactly the kind of man I've spent my whole life trying not to become. I offered you a choice because it mattered to me that you actually made one." Something shifted between them that night, subtle but undeniable, the careful distance they had maintained beginning to soften into something closer to genuine companionship. Elena began joining him in the study some evenings, not to discuss business, but simply to read in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing an observation about her day or asking about something from his own. She found herself looking forward to these quiet hours in a way she had not expected, a comfort that felt entirely different from anything she had known with Daniel, quieter, but somehow far more solid. Their marriage began to change in other ways as well. Victor started including her in certain decisions about the restaurant's expansion, valuing her opinion in a way that made her feel like a genuine partner, rather than simply someone he was protecting. He introduced her, carefully and selectively, to a small circle of people whose trust mattered to him, and Elena noticed the way his associates began to treat her with a respect that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with genuine acceptance into his world. She also began to understand more fully the dangers that shaped his daily life. There were nights he came home later than expected, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told her he was hiding something difficult from her, and mornings when extra security appeared around the house without explanation, a silent signal that some new threat had emerged in the shifting balance of power he worked so hard to maintain. One such night, nearly 4 months into their marriage, Victor returned home well past midnight, his jaw tight with barely contained frustration. Elena had waited up, curled in a chair in the study, with a book she had not managed to read a single page of, too worried to focus on anything beyond the sound of the front gate. "The family from the docks made a move tonight," he said, sitting heavily across from her. "Nobody was hurt, but they destroyed a shipment I had counting on, for a business deal that keeps nearly 200 people employed at the docks legitimately. It was a message, letting me know they can reach into my operations whenever they choose." "What are you going to do?" Elena asked. "I don't know yet," Victor admitted, and the honesty of the admission seemed to cost him something. "For years, I've believed that patience and careful strategy would eventually resolve this without anyone getting seriously hurt. Tonight, I'm less certain that patience is still the right approach." Elena moved to sit beside him, an instinct she did not question until she was already settled close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You don't have to solve it all tonight. Sometimes the answer looks clearer with rest." Victor turned to look at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression that she had never seen before. "You're remarkably calm for someone married to a man whose enemies just destroyed a shipment worth more money than most people see in a lifetime." "I've learned that panic doesn't actually solve anything," Elena said quietly. "It just makes the waiting worse." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while after that, and when Elena finally rose to retire to her own wing of the house, Victor caught her hand gently, just for a moment. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying up, for asking. Most people in my life only want something from me. It's rare to have someone simply present, without an agenda behind it." Elena felt something warm settle in her chest at his words, an unfamiliar feeling she was not ready to name yet, though she suspected, walking back to her room that night, that whatever this marriage had started as, it was quietly becoming something else entirely. The following weeks brought a strange new rhythm to their household, one built around careful negotiations and quiet late-night conversations, as Victor worked to resolve the conflict at the docks without triggering wider violence. Elena found herself pulled further into his confidence, not because he needed her advice on matters of strategy, but because he seemed to genuinely value having someone to think out loud with, someone whose judgment he trusted without reservation. It was during one of these late conversations that Elena first admitted, quietly and almost accidentally, the full truth of what had brought her to this city in the first place. She told him about Daniel, about Grace, about the humiliation of discovering her entire life had been built on a lie she never suspected. Victor listened without interruption, his expression carefully neutral until she finished, and then he said something that surprised her with its simplicity. "Their loss says nothing about your worth, Elena. It says everything about their character. You should never carry shame for a betrayal that belonged entirely to them." It was not a grand declaration, not a promise of love or devotion, but it settled something in Elena that had been unsettled since that terrible morning months ago, a quiet validation she had not realized she was still waiting to hear. She looked at Victor then, really looked at him, and understood with sudden clarity that whatever careful, practical arrangement had brought them together, she no longer wanted to simply survive inside this marriage. She wanted, cautiously, and with the kind of hope she had been afraid to feel again, to build something real within it. Winter arrived in the city with sharp winds and early darkness, and with it came a shift in Elena and Victor's marriage that neither of them announced aloud, but both seemed to recognize at the same time. Their late-night conversations in the study became a nightly habit rather than an occasional comfort, and Elena found herself thinking about Victor throughout her days at the restaurant, wondering what he would say about a particular decision, catching herself smiling at the memory of something he had told her the night before. Victor, too, seemed changed by the growing warmth between them. He began arriving home earlier when his schedule allowed it, and Elena noticed the careful way he started asking about her day before discussing anything related to business, as though her well-being had become a priority separate from the practical arrangement that had first brought them together. He remembered small details she mentioned only once, brought home a particular tea she had commented on liking during a dinner months earlier, and made a point of introducing her at social gatherings not as an arrangement of convenience, but as his wife, with a quiet pride that Elena found herself treasuring more than she expected to. The conflict at the docks resolved itself gradually through a combination of careful negotiation and strategic pressure that Victor never fully explained to Elena, though she understood enough to know that his approach had prioritized stability over retaliation, protecting the workers who depended on those docks for their livelihood, rather than escalating a conflict that would have put countless innocent people at risk. She watched him navigate the resolution with a kind of quiet, principled determination that only deepened her growing respect for him, and by the time the tension finally eased, she realized she had stopped thinking of their marriage as an arrangement at all. It was on a quiet evening in early spring that Victor finally spoke the words neither of them had dared say directly before. They were sitting together in the garden behind the house, watching the last light fade from the sky, when he reached over and took her hand, an act so simple it should not have felt as significant as it did. "I did not marry you expecting this," he said quietly. "I married you to keep you safe, and I told myself that would be enough, that I had no right to want anything more from someone who agreed to this marriage under such difficult circumstances. But I find that I do want more, Elena. I have fallen in love with you, and I no longer know how to pretend otherwise." Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming in their intensity. "I never thought I would trust anyone again after Daniel," she admitted. "But you've given me something I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. I love you too, Victor, completely." The months that followed were, in many ways, the happiest Elena had ever known. Their marriage transformed from careful cohabitation into genuine partnership, filled with quiet mornings shared over coffee, evenings spent discussing everything from the restaurant's future to Victor's careful plans for expanding his legitimate business interests in ways that might eventually let him step back from the more dangerous aspects of his world. Elena began to feel, for the first time since that terrible morning in Daniel's apartment, that she had built something real, something that could not be taken from her the way her old life had been. It was during this period of quiet happiness that the past finally caught up with her, arriving in a form she never expected. Elena was reviewing the restaurant's reservation list one afternoon when a name on the list stopped her cold: Daniel Pierce, listed for a party of 2, scheduled for that very evening. She stood frozen at the reservation desk for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities. It could be coincidence, she told herself, though some instinct refused to believe it. The restaurant had grown well known in recent months, its reputation spreading beyond the neighborhood, but the timing felt too precise to be accidental. She considered canceling the reservation, finding some excuse to turn Daniel away before he ever set foot inside. But something stubborn in her, the same part of her that had refused to return home after that terrible morning, wanted to face him directly, rather than hide from a confrontation that felt inevitable. Daniel arrived that evening, looking older than she remembered, though it had only been a little over a year since she had last seen him. He was seated with a woman Elena did not recognize, and when he glanced up and saw Elena standing near the host stand, his expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession, surprise giving way to something calculating that Elena remembered all too well from the final months of their relationship, before it had ever crossed her mind that he might be capable of the betrayal he eventually committed. "Elena," he said, rising from his seat despite the woman across from him watching with visible confusion. "I had no idea you were here. This is remarkable." "Isn't it?" Elena replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral, though her heart pounded with an intensity she had not expected to still feel in his presence. "You look wonderful," Daniel said, his eyes moving over her with an appraisal that made her deeply uncomfortable now in a way it never had before. "I heard you'd left town after everything happened. I never imagined you'd end up somewhere like this." "Life has a way of surprising all of us," Elena said, aware that other diners nearby had begun to take notice of the tension in the conversation. The woman with Daniel finally spoke, her voice sharp with irritation. "Daniel, who is this?" "An old friend," Daniel said quickly, though the way he said it made Elena's skin crawl with recognition. It was the exact tone he had once used to describe Grace before the truth came out. Elena excused herself professionally, ensuring their table was properly attended before retreating to her office, where she allowed herself several long minutes to simply breathe and steady her racing thoughts. She had not expected to see Daniel again, had certainly not expected the strange mixture of anger and unexpected vulnerability his presence stirred in her, reminders of a version of herself she thought she had left behind entirely. She told Victor about the encounter that evening, watching his expression carefully as she described what had happened. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of Daniel's name, though his voice remained calm when he responded. "Do you think it was coincidence?" he asked. I don't know, Elena admitted. The restaurant has become well known enough that it's possible. But something about the timing feels deliberate. Victor was quiet for a moment, considering. I'll have someone look into it discreetly. If he's here by chance, there's no cause for concern. But if there's something more calculated behind it, I want to understand what he's after, before he has the chance to act on it. The investigation Victor quietly commissioned revealed something troubling within days. Daniel had, in fact, learned of Elena's new life through a mutual acquaintance from their hometown, someone who had recognized her in a photograph from a charitable event Victor had attended with her several months earlier. Daniel had spent weeks arranging business in the city specifically to place himself in proximity to her, motivated, it seemed, by a combination of jealousy over her apparent success and a calculating awareness of the wealth and power now surrounding her. Even more troubling, the investigation revealed that Daniel's relationship with Grace had ended shortly after Elena left town, and that Daniel had spent the intervening year moving through a series of increasingly desperate financial ventures, each one failing more spectacularly than the last, leaving him deeply in debt to people far less forgiving than Elena had ever been. He's not here out of nostalgia, Victor said grimly, once the full picture had emerged. He's here because he sees an opportunity, either to extract money from you directly, playing on whatever guilt he imagines you might still carry, or to use his knowledge of your past to create problems for us that he believes he can profit from resolving. Elena felt a cold anger settle over her, different from the raw heartbreak she had carried in the months after discovering his betrayal. This was clearer, sharper, unclouded by the confusion of lost love. What do you suggest we do? For now, nothing, Victor said. Let him believe he still has the advantage of surprise. We'll watch his next move carefully, and we'll be ready for whatever he attempts. Over the following weeks, Daniel's presence became an increasingly persistent shadow in Elena's life. He returned to the restaurant twice more, each time finding some excuse to speak with her privately, his conversation shifting subtly between nostalgic appeals to their shared history and increasingly obvious references to how difficult his financial circumstances had become. Elena remained carefully professional during each encounter, giving him no indication of how much Victor's investigation had already revealed about his true motives. The final piece of Daniel's scheme became clear when Elena received a message through the restaurant's general contact line, ostensibly meant for the manager, but clearly intended for her specifically. Daniel had written asking to meet privately, hinting that he possessed information about her past that certain people in the city, people connected to Victor's business rivals, might find very interesting if it ever came to light. Elena brought the message directly to Victor that evening, her hands steady, despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. He's threatening to sell information about me to your enemies, she said. I don't even know what information he thinks he has that would matter to anyone. Victor read the message twice, his expression darkening with a controlled fury that Elena had glimpsed only once before, the night the shipment at the docks had been destroyed. It doesn't matter what information he actually has. It matters that he believes he can use the mere suggestion of scandal to extract money from either of us, or to create doubt about your history that my rivals could exploit to undermine my position. What do we do? Elena asked. Victor set the message down carefully, his expression settling into the calm, calculated focus Elena had come to recognize as the look he wore when preparing to solve a problem decisively. We give him exactly the meeting he's asking for, but we make certain, this time, that he understands precisely who he's decided to threaten. The meeting was arranged for a private room in a hotel Victor owned discreetly through a business partner, a location chosen specifically because it offered complete privacy, while remaining entirely within Victor's controlled territory. Daniel arrived exactly on time, his expression carrying the confident swagger of a man who believed he held all the leverage in the conversation he was about to have. He stopped short, however, the moment he stepped into the room and found not Elena waiting alone, but Elena seated beside Victor, with two of Victor's most trusted associates positioned quietly near the door. Elena, I asked to speak with you privately, Daniel said, his confidence flickering for just a moment before he attempted to recover it. You asked to speak with my wife about information you believe you possess, Victor said calmly, his voice carrying an authority that filled the room without needing to be raised. I thought it would save everyone considerable time if we addressed this directly. Daniel's eyes moved between them, calculating rapidly. I don't think this concerns you, Mr. Calloway. Everything concerning my wife concerns me, Victor replied. Please, sit. Let's discuss this information you believe has value. Daniel sat reluctantly, though his posture remained defensive. I know things about Elena's past. Personal things. Things that certain people in this city might find useful in shaping how they view her, and by extension you. Such as? Victor asked, his tone almost bored, though Elena could see the careful control beneath his composed exterior. Daniel hesitated, clearly unprepared for the confrontation to unfold this directly. I know why she left our hometown so suddenly. I know about the broken engagement, the family scandal. People might wonder what kind of woman marries a man like you within months of fleeing that kind of humiliation. Elena felt her chest tighten with old shame for just a moment, the instinct to shrink from exposure still lingering somewhere beneath the strength she had built over the past year. But she thought of everything Victor had told her in the quiet hours of their marriage, that the betrayal had belonged entirely to Daniel and Grace, never to her, and the shame gave way quickly to something far steadier. You're referring to the engagement you ended, Elena said, her voice clear and unshaken, by having an affair with my sister for over a year, before I discovered it myself. That's the scandal you're threatening to reveal. Your own betrayal. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not how people will hear it, once certain details are added. What details would those be? Victor asked, leaning forward slightly. That my wife left an unfaithful fiancé and built a new life for herself? I fail to see how that reflects poorly on anyone except you. There are people in this city, Daniel said, his voice growing sharper with desperation, who would pay very well for anything that could be used against you, Calloway. Rumors, half-truths, doesn't matter what's actually accurate. It only matters what people choose to believe. Victor's expression hardened into something Elena had never seen directed at another person before, a cold, focused intensity that made even Daniel visibly shrink back in his seat. You've spent considerable time and money arranging your presence in this city, specifically to threaten my wife, hoping to extract payment through implied blackmail. I want you to understand something very clearly before you leave this room. I already know about your debts, Daniel. I know about every failed venture you've pursued over the past year, and I know exactly which people you currently owe money to, people considerably less patient than I have been with you tonight. Daniel's face paled slightly. Here is what will happen, Victor continued, his voice never rising, which somehow made the words more chilling than shouting ever could have. You will leave this city tonight, and you will never contact my wife again, in any form, through any means. In exchange, I will ensure that certain debts of yours are quietly settled, not out of generosity toward you, but because I have no interest in your desperate financial circumstances becoming a continuing distraction in my wife's life. If you attempt to contact her again, or if you speak a single word about her past to anyone in this city, or your own hometown, I will withdraw that arrangement entirely, and you will be left to face your creditors without any protection whatsoever. Daniel sat in stunned silence for a long moment, clearly processing the fact that his attempted extortion had been not only anticipated, but entirely dismantled before he had even finished making his threat. You had this planned before I walked in, he finally said. I plan for every possibility where my wife's safety and well-being are concerned, Victor said simply. You should consider yourself fortunate that my response has been this measured. Elena watched Daniel's face shift through anger, humiliation, and finally a kind of defeated acceptance, and she felt none of the old ache she might have expected, no lingering hurt at seeing him brought low. Instead, she felt only a quiet, settled relief, the sense of a chapter finally closing on terms she had helped to write herself. Elena, Daniel said quietly, some of his earlier bravado draining away entirely, I am sorry. For everything. I never should have done what I did to you. Elena considered his apology for a long moment, weighing whether it carried any genuine weight or simply reflected the desperation of a man who had run out of other options. I believe you're sorry that your plan failed tonight, she said finally. Whether you're sorry for the actual betrayal is something only you can answer honestly, and it no longer matters to me either way. I've built a life I'm proud of. You no longer have any place in it. Daniel left the hotel that night without further argument, and true to Victor's word, he departed the city within days, His debts quietly settled through channels Elena never fully understood, and did not particularly want explained to her. She heard, much later, through the same distant family connections that had once informed her of Grace's relationship with him, that Daniel had moved to a smaller city several states away, working a modest job, far removed from the ambitions that had once driven him to betray the people who trusted him most. In the months that followed, Elena's marriage to Victor deepened into something even stronger than before, tempered by the shared experience of facing down a threat together, and emerging with their trust in each other only reinforced. The restaurant continued to flourish under her management, and Victor began, slowly and carefully, transitioning more of his business interests toward entirely legitimate ventures, a process Elena knew would take years, but one she watched him pursue with genuine determination. On the one-year anniversary of their wedding, Victor arranged a quiet dinner in the same private room where their small ceremony had taken place, though this time the room was filled with warmth rather than careful practicality, candles casting soft light across a table set for two. "I once told you this marriage began as a shield rather than a romance," Victor said, raising his glass toward her. "I want you to know that I no longer think of it that way at all. You have become the truest partner I have ever known, Elena, in every sense that matters." Elena smiled, thinking back to that terrifying, humiliating morning that had once felt like the ending of everything she believed her life would be, and marveling at how completely it had instead become the beginning of a life she could never have imagined for herself. "I came to this city with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart," she said. "I never could have guessed I would find, not just safety, but real happiness, in the last place I expected to look." Victor reached across the table and took her hand, his expression soft with a warmth few people beyond Elena ever had the privilege of seeing. Sometimes the life we're forced into by circumstance becomes more genuine than the one we carefully planned for ourselves. I am grateful, every single day, that betrayal led you here, to me. Outside the private room, the city moved through its evening rhythms, unaware of the quiet strength contained within the walls of that small space, where a woman who had once been discarded now sat as an equal partner to one of the most powerful men in the city, having built, through resilience and careful courage, a life entirely her own. Elena Marsh, who had once believed her worth was measured by another person's loyalty, had learned instead that her value had never depended on anyone else's choices at all, and that the truest kind of strength came not from avoiding heartbreak, but from choosing, again and again, to build something meaningful in its aftermath.